people, welcome back to the Propagandist channel for some more Retrospective RWBY Volume 3. So, last episode of course we had Chapter 6 and we officially reached the halfway point of this volume, the moment at which things in Volume 3 start to shift from RWBY's usual sort of, fairly cheery, still quite positive tone to something that's starting to get darker and more serious. So, yeah, we're at that kind of interesting moment now in the show, ladies and gentlemen. So, at this point, as mentioned in, the last episode, we're going to take a brief intermission before we get into Chapter 7 to go through some World of Remnant episodes, because, as I think I've previously pointed out, there are 4 more World of Remnants on this DVD copy of mine, and I think now probably is the best time to look at them. So one of them, I think, covers the Vital Tournament. There's another one on the Cross-Continental Transmit System. There's one on the 4 Maidens, and there is a 4th one that I've forgotten. Let me just check what it was. Oh yeah, it's Huntsmen. So Huntsmen and Huntresses, basically who they are, which surprised they didn't actually make that one, Team RWBY that is, back in the day. Team RWBY, sorry, is what I'm trying to say. I'm surprised they didn't make that one actually during Volume 2. Maybe they had plans and maybe they just ran out of time, I don't know, so they released it with Volume 3 instead. Yeah, so we're getting another kind of world building episode basically on this one. So it's a moment to sort of, decompress and, get the stress under control before we get into Chapter 7, etc. and beyond. It was funny really because as I said last episode, when I was watching that Yang Mercury fight sequence again, it was funny because, this is obviously a retrospective non-blind let's watch. I've seen Volume 3 before, so I know overall what's going to happen. Granted, there are occasionally things that I forget, but generally, the main sort of story beats, the big things that happen in certain episodes that are really sort of plot important, I do tend to remember those things. And yet, despite the fact that I obviously remember the Yang Mercury fight sequence and I know how it's going to play out, or I knew how it was going to play out, I'm still, watching it back, found my sort of heart racing a little bit, because you know how bad it kind of gets for Yang in this volume. So if that fight sequence alone is still managing to get my heart racing, even, now, watching this volume again for the 3rd or 4th time, or however, many times I've watched it previously, that does make me wonder what it's going to be when we get to the final couple of episodes of this volume and the real sort of nonsense starts to actually go down. When I say the nonsense, I mean basically, the fight sequence with Adam in particular, to put it that way. So yeah, so if you see like little dust motes swirling around in the air in my room, I think it's probably visible like that because of the fact that it's the sun is shining today for once here in the UK, height of winter and all that. Actually, by the time this video goes out, it'll be something like 21st of December, I think. Just to date the video, it is 30th of November as I'm going to record. Like I've said previously, I am trying to block record some episodes of this now, because basically if I can record maybe this episode and possibly next weekend, I might then record another 1 or 2. That should then mean I have sufficient RWBY content to keep me going on the Propagandist channel into January. So, by that time, of course, I will be back from visiting friends and family, and will therefore have time to get back to the recording schedule and pre-record a load of additional content in preparation for, for the new year, basically. Yeah, that's the plan anyway for the next week or so. But yeah, this one's going out on 21st of December, I think, if I'm remembering correctly from my upload schedule and all that. So yeah, this will be the last episode, I think. Is it 21st? No, what am I talking about? This is not going out on 21st of December, it'll be 28th of December, won't it? No, because Chapter 6, yeah, that will be the one that went out 21st of December. Sorry, you're probably wondering what I was talking about there. I just had a brain fart and misremembered. No, I think this one's going out on 28th of December. So no, this will be the final RWBY episode that goes out on the channel in 2025. That's right, because then obviously it'll be New Year's, and then the next episode, Chapter 7, the Chapter 7 reaction, that'll come out in January. There you go, see, I'm remembering now. So yeah, I'll sort of say here, it being 28th of December as when this video goes out. Hope you're all looking forward to New Year. and you know, let's hope that 2026 has more good stuff happening in it, because Lord knows 2026 has certainly been a bit of a how should I say, depressing year in certain 2025 even. 2025 has been a bit of a depressing year in certain respects. Not for me personally. I'm quite lucky, you know. I've been enjoying work, and you know, work's been quite rewarding and all that. But no, I mean, 2025 has been a depressing year, sort of in terms of current affairs, because of the fact of, you know, all the shit that's going on in the world at the moment. So yes, hopefully, you know, my videos can give you a momentary respite from the stress and anxiety of the world that we're in at the moment. But yeah, let's not start going down political current affairs route and all that, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so World of Remnant. In terms of the episodes that we're going to be looking at, so we're going to have the background on the Vital Festival, which I sort of wonder if that's going to tie in a bit with some of the history that we've heard previously about the kingdoms in one of the other World of Remnants that we had during Volume 2, maybe. The CCT World of Remnant, I'm also wondering if that might provide a little bit more of the, you know, the history of the World of Remnant and why those things were set up. What else? Obviously we've got Huntsmen and Huntresses, and then we got, of course, the 4 Maidens. Now, the 4 Maidens I don't think will be anything particularly new. At least, you know, I'd be surprised if there's anything particularly new in there that we didn't hear in Chapter 6, but you never know, it might give us a little bit more information, that kind of thing. So therefore it might be quite interesting to watch that again, particularly in, you know, with reference to what we saw in Volume 6, for example, and the whole backstory of Ozpin and Salem. So these are things to maybe look forward to in these 4, ladies and gentlemen. As usual, I'll probably be pausing throughout them just to give my thoughts, but we'll see. Alright, that's probably enough by way of an intro. Let's actually get to it. Okay, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, on the extras menu of my DVD copy of Volume 3. So, we got the 4 World of Remnant episodes there, in the middle. We've also got that Legacy of RWBY and RWBY photos. So that might be something, a couple of things actually that we watch once we get to the end of Volume 3. Just, you know, to have a look at some of the extras on this DVD. Somebody mentioned also the other extras that are actually on this DVD copy. Obviously there's like the trailer for Grim Eclipse, which we may watch just for the hell of it. But also that Laser Time thing that I think was on there. I think people mentioned in the comments that that is something RWBY related, possibly. So it might be interesting to have a look at that as well. We can do an episode at the end of Volume 3 where we just look at some of these extras, basically. I know there was something else on there that wasn't specifically RWBY related. I don't know if we'll necessarily look at that, maybe. Or maybe that's just a bit of supplementary material that can go in another playlist on the channel, who knows. Alright, fuck it, let's just go. The tournament, ladies and gentlemen. 3, 2, 1, go. Volume up. Here we go. Thought so, I knew it was a World of Remnant, this one. It's just it's listed online as being called the Vital Tournament, Vital Festival Tournament, but here on the DVD copy it's just the tournament.
It all began, as most things do, with war. The kingdoms of the world had been locked in a violent struggle for years, but eventually the Great War of Remnant came to an end on the small island of Vital. It was here that humanity's leaders chose peace over bloodshed and constructed the future of modern society, establishing new laws, new academies, and new traditions.
Just a quick pause, sorry. I'll just bring that time back a little bit so when I resume it, you can sort of listen to what Oz's been saying in there. The thing that I really don't know all that much about in RWBY is this war that happened in its history. So, obviously, I think Jean in Volume 1 mentioned, didn't he, about his sword, his weapon, that it was a hand-me-down from, was it his grandfather or was it his great-grandfather who fought in the war? So, basically, at some point, the World of Remnant has had a world war, in essence. But I can't... We've had sort of references to it here and there. I'm wondering if there is a World of Remnant on it, maybe during Volume 4, perhaps. We'll encounter that, I don't know. But, essentially, yeah, war between nations then. So, yeah, we've just sort of had snippets of information that we have to try and piece together in terms of what this was, but I'm sure we'll probably find out more about it later on. 3, 2, 1, resume.
Traditions. The Vital Festival was created to serve as a celebration of peace between the kingdoms. Every 2 years, a kingdom would be chosen to open its doors to the world, allowing citizens from every corner of Remnant to meet and indulge in one another's cultures. The pinnacle of this event was the Vital Festival Tournament. After the newly formed Huntsmen academies proved to be a success,
so basically,
the Vital Festival Tournament was designed to test the strengths of the kingdom's warriors in a safe and friendly competitive environment.
I was going to say, so basically we moved the war
to ensure that the world's huntsmen
from actual battlefields
for mediocrity, but would
to an arena
to become the absolute best they could be. As the skills of the huntsmen grew, so did the games. And in
It's actually quite a short
it
one,
was
this.
decided that the tournament would need a stage equal in greatness to that of its competitors. Amity Coliseum was the culmination of the Four Kingdoms' efforts, a technological marvel and a shining symbol of harmony, capable of making the journey to all the kingdoms of Remnant. It's true that all of this began with war, but it is peace that has served to shepherd humanity on its ascension to greatness.
So that was, yeah, just a very quick one, ladies and gentlemen, about that.
May we never stray from that path.
Sorry, I was about to click the pause button just then. Okay, right. So, again, nothing specifically about the festival itself there, I think, was new. It was just interesting, I think, for a bit of the little snippets of information on the backstory of the World of Remnant, particularly in relation to this war that we've heard about from time to time over the volumes and all that. So, interesting. Not really much else for me to say, because obviously that was a very short one, but let's get into the Huntsmen one as well. Back up. So, actually, before Ospin or Crow or whoever narrates this one starts talking, what I will say is, with Huntsmen and Huntresses, this sort of position of kind of a warrior in the World of Remnant, that's something which I'm assuming that maybe comes about in the aftermath of the Remnant War as well, potentially, because isn't it? Because I just remember that in Volume 6, Maria Calavera comes out with something quite interesting, doesn't she? Do you remember the scene where Maria and Ruby have their conversation in the backyard of Terracotta Ark's house? Yeah, Terracotta Ark and Saffron's house. For a second, I was forgetting the name of John's sister. Yeah, you remember that conversation they had, right? And when Maria was talking about, was it her father? And that, she always remembered him as an old soldier. And she does mention there, I think, in that conversation, that the title of Huntsman or Huntress was not something that was around in her day, because obviously, admittedly, she's quite old. But that obviously means that this title is something that, in this sort of grand scheme of Remnant's history, relatively speaking, it's actually quite young. It's quite a new thing, to put it that way. When I say new, I put new in inverted commas. Not new in the sense of it's only just come about in our protagonist's lifetime, but it's possibly a title that may well be less than a century in age. So, like I say, in the grand scheme of the history of Remnant humanity, it's not that old, to put it that way. Let's see what it says. This one also is only about 2 minutes long. Right, 3, 2, 1, resume. Okay, I'm on VLC.
Huntsmen and Huntresses, the best and brightest warriors of Remnant, ranking higher than Kingdom Police and even military in terms of strength and skill. The occupation was established alongside the Huntsmen Academies after the Great War, with the hope of creating elite warriors whose sole purpose would be to combat the creatures of Grimm. Beacon Academy was founded in Vale, Haven founded in Mistral, Shade founded in Vacuo, and Atlas founded in the now defunct Kingdom of Mantle. These institutions accepted graduates of primary combat schools who showed enough promise and tenacity to not only battle the world's deadliest creatures, but also protect their fellow man. For this reason, trainees are grouped into teams, ensuring the continual development of communication, empathy, and teamwork, traits that are vital to any guardian of peace. As an additional precaution to maintaining peace, the founders of the academies believe that their graduates should be kept separate from kingdom allegiance. Once finished with their training, huntsmen and huntresses are free to choose who they work for, as well as what kind of work they will do through the use of missions.
That allegiance point is interesting. We'll come to that in a second.
A particular kingdom or village is entirely up to the individual. However, Atlas Academy has come under increasing amounts of scrutiny for the indoctrination of military lifestyle upon its students, pressuring them to enlist in the Atlas military's Special Operatives Unit. Every academy has its own methods of teaching, but the end result is the same. Huntsmen and huntresses ready to make their own paths. Some will stay together as a team, some will move on to work alone. But all are expected to serve humanity and never succumb to the darkness.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, let me just I've got some thoughts coming out of that one there. So, yeah. So Osman says that formally, huntsmen and huntresses are supposed to be sort of independent of any particular allegiance to a particular kingdom. So, in that sense, I guess they're a bit like a real world, or supposed to be, a bit like a real world international organisation. They're like the UN of Remnant. No, they're not, but, I just thought I'd make that joke. But yeah, because when he said that, I was about to say, but what about Atlas, though? Because Atlas is the unusual one, right? Because everything we've heard about Atlas that we've seen, not just in this volume, but also other volumes, is that their sort of huntsman, huntress sort of educational system, their training system, their military, and aspects of, their security system, that's all kind of integrated into one. So does that not cause a bit of an issue from Atlas's side in terms of, are their huntsmen and huntresses actually really independent of any sort of kingdom allegiance, or are they sort of very much expected to be allied with the interests of the Atlas government, for instance? And so, I mean, Osbin kind of actually mentioned that point there, that actually there is a bit of an issue. The other thing that I just thought on a more sort of humorous level was that Osbin explained it in terms of, because of that fusion between military and huntsman and huntress academies in Atlas, that means that a lot of the people who are trained to be huntsmen and huntresses in Atlas are effectively kind of expected that they will go. It's expected that they will go into the Atlas military as special operatives. And as soon as he said that, obviously on the screen it had a silhouette representing winter Schnee. But do you remember in Volume 6 when Team RWBY and company, they got to Argus and they were outside the Atlas military base, and they're about to meet the special operative who runs that base. And I remember everyone at the time, when that episode was about to come out, I think everyone thought it was going to be winter, but then it turned out it wasn't. It was Caroline Cordovin. But the thing is, Caroline Cordovin is actually introduced as a special operative, which I find interesting, because, I mean, maybe it's just the way it's worded here, but Osbin using the term special operative as a term for somebody who's been trained to be a huntsman or huntress in Atlas, but who then effectively has been kind of subsumed into the Atlas military. That makes me think, did Caroline Cordovin go through some sort of huntress training when she was younger? Is she a huntress? Because certainly one didn't quite get that impression necessarily of her, because Caroline Cordovin in Volume 6 was portrayed as being a bit of a how should I say, self-serving, slightly incompetent, strategically speaking, officer and all that. So yeah, interesting stuff. All right, CCT, 3, 2, 1, go. Oh,
has seen hundreds of technological
Already
advances that
talking.
have changed society. The most influential of all of them being the cross-continental transmit system. Prior to the invention of the CCTS, long-range communication was extremely limited. The discovery and development of radio technology allowed for communication within the boundaries of most kingdoms. But communication with other parts of the world was restricted to the physical delivery of messages. With every alternative form of communication that was proposed, there seemed to be the perfect obstacle. The destructive nature of the creatures of Grimm severely limited the reliability of ground-based technologies. The concept of relay satellites orbiting around the planet was promising. Unfortunately, modern man has yet to make the technological advancements required to achieve spaceflight, as all known dust types lose their power as they begin to leave Remnant's atmosphere.
This is interesting. So I've had moments throughout this retrospective series so far where I've been talking about dust and some of the kind of crazy and wacky headcanons and theories that there are in terms of what it is. And I find it really sort of interesting that... Because this is a point I forgot. Because obviously in Volume 7 and 8, there was the whole plan that Ironwood originally devised, which was we get the entirety of Atlas, we use the Spear of Creation, well, was it the Spear of Creation technically he was proposing to use there, or was it just the sheer amount of dust, to basically levitate the city right up into the upper atmosphere of Remnant, not quite into space, but very high up so that the Grimm wouldn't be able to get there. But of course this was a detail that I've kind of forgot, which is that when you get out of Remnant's atmosphere and you're basically in space at that point, dust seems to lose its properties, and therefore, you know, you can't rely on it as a fuel source in order to be able to basically get beyond the world's atmosphere. Which is interesting because, I mean, it's interesting I think on several fronts. So on the one hand, I think this tells us something about the trajectory that Remnant has been through in terms of its technological development, how it's been very, very reliant on dust. Because the thing is, you know, one would assume that in a world like Remnant, you know, dust is not the only type of fuel source out there, right? Surely there'd be other ones, you know, coal, oil, gas, etc., etc. But it makes you wonder to what extent has Remnant ever developed alternative forms of fuel and energy? Or is it literally the case that, you know, ever since really the second dawn of humanity, pretty much every civilization that's existed on Remnant has been very, very dependent on dust because of its abundance and the fact that it's just there and readily available. So, curious, isn't it? Yeah. So there's that angle to it as well. I'm just thinking as well what this means, if anything, for a lot of the headcanons that I've kind of outlined. I know not everyone accepts those headcanons. I'm basically talking here about, you know, these sort of wild and wacky theories for where dust ultimately comes from and what it really is. But the fact that beyond the atmosphere of Remnant, dust seems to lose its properties, I think is very interesting. Because to me, what one can infer from that is that dust is so intimately bound to Remnant that basically it doesn't function outside of that world. So, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's just one tiny detail. I'm not sure how much you can really extrapolate from it, but it is interesting that, yeah, because I don't know, that seems to be what it's inferring, or something, you know, an inference one might be able to take, potentially, from that. Then again, you know, sometimes with these little snippets of information, they're so sparse and so small that actually, you know, anything you infer from them can just sometimes stray into wild speculation, but interesting stuff. Yeah, right, let's keep going. This one's slightly longer, actually, this one. I've already done a minute. There's still just under 3 to go. That's good. 3, 2, 1, resume.
Eventually, it was the people of Atlas, the world's leader in science and technology, that developed the cross-continental transmit system. It was revolutionary. Like radio, signals were sent and received wirelessly, though the content of these transmissions were not nearly as limited. Audio, video, images, and text were all capable of transmission, and eventually an entire online web of information was at mankind's fingertips.
They built the internet.
Currently, the system is supported by 4 primary relay towers, each located within a safeguarded area of the kingdoms. These towers allow for wireless communication within a kingdom through the use of devices such as scrolls. Signals become less reliable the farther a user travels from the CCT tower. And although smaller support towers do exist outside of kingdoms, they are constantly at risk of destruction by the creatures of greed. Shortcomings aside, for the first time in history, digital transmissions between kingdoms were possible through the use of slightly more advanced devices, typically found in homes and CCT centers. The cross-continental transmit system has and will continue to advance the progression of mankind. However, if one of the 4 towers is taken offline, the entire network fails with it. A slight inconvenience during routine maintenance, but to be honest,
quite a vulnerability.
Somewhat poetic. No one voice is louder than the others, and no voice may be silenced without the rest. If the people of Remnant are to speak, then they shall do so together. Or not at all.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, this is obviously part of Salem's plan by the end of this volume, which is knock out the Veil Tower, and then the CCT basically fails, and thus you isolate the kingdoms from one another, in a sense. So yeah, everything Salem does, it's all for the purpose of dividing humanity, and, you know, part of that is literally breaking down channels of communication between them. Interesting stuff, yeah. No, I think it was also interesting just for that space point. But, yeah. Okay, final one then. 4 Maidens. 3, 2, 1, go. Ooh, this is a big one. Just under 7 minutes, this one. So maybe this will tell us a bit more then. Something we've not necessarily learned from Chapter 6, but I don't know.
Deep in the forests of Remnant, beside a great and mighty river, stood the small, fragile home of a cold, frail man. A lone wizard. Hidden from the dangers and distractions of the world, the wizard seldom had visitors. But on this day, as he peered out his window, his gaze fell upon a young maiden. Calmly she sat beneath his tree, in a state of absolute tranquility. When the wizard demanded an explanation, the maiden simply replied, "My name is Winter. I am on a journey, and I am waiting for my sisters." With that, she closed her eyes and sat in silence. The wizard told himself the girl was a fool, but the longer she sat, the more he wished to share in the serenity the young maiden enjoyed. In time, he grew tired and decided to close his eyes as well, thinking on this strange predicament. Upon opening his eyes, the wizard was befuddled to find that a second maiden had appeared beneath his tree, cheerful and spry, with a basket of fruit and flowers. When he asked for an explanation, the girl simply replied, "My name is Spring. I'm on a journey, and I am waiting for my sisters." To show her gratitude for his reluctant hospitality, the girl retrieved a handful of seeds from her basket and planted them in the wizard's garden.
She flew along through the air.
The old hermit could hardly believe his eyes as the maiden turned what was once a mere pile of dirt and manure into a beautiful garden from which life would surely blossom. It's likely he would have gazed for hours, were it not for the unfamiliar laughter he heard from beneath his tree. A young woman with a warm smile now stood beside the 2 maidens. The wizard begged her to introduce herself, to which she happily responded, "My name is Summer. I am on a journey, and I am waiting for my sister." Of course, thought the wizard. But another chirp of laughter left the old man perplexed. What in the world was so funny? As it turned out, it was him. The new arrival found the wizard's insistence on staying indoors so very amusing. Why choose to view the world through a small window when the door leading out to it was right at his side. It was a compelling argument, and after only a moment of brief hesitation, the wizard left his home and snuck outside. The warmth of the sun brought with it a surge of energy and life, and soon the wizard wasn't feeling much like himself anymore. He was feeling much better. As the day drew to a close, the maidens and the wizard all settled down and prepared a feast.
I have some thoughts in a moment, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Winter set the table. Spring supplied the crops. Summer prepped the meal, and the wizard was the happiest he'd been in ages. But in all the excitement, he nearly failed to notice the delicate woman that now stood beneath his tree. He smiled and beckoned her to join them, asking only for her name. "My name is Fall," she replied softly. "I am on a journey and am here to meet my sisters. Who are you?" "Me?" the wizard wondered. "Well, I am but an old hermit. I have lived in these woods alone for centuries, and I'm afraid my story is not very interesting.
It's Ospen,
as
yeah.
I have no one to love and nothing to my name." The eldest sister looked up at all that surrounded them. "But sir, do you not see? You have so much." It was true. With their help, it was now clear to see that the wizard had everything he could ever need. He was grateful, but a question lingered in his mind. "Why me?" he asked. "Why did the four of you choose to open my eyes, to share with me your gifts? Why am I so special?" The four sisters looked to one another, perplexed. Finally, the eldest spoke. "I beg your pardon, sir, but we did not do these things for you because you were special. We do what we can for everyone, because we are able." The old wizard was at a loss. Never in his years had he come across such kindness. It was in that moment that he knew what should be done. The wizard summoned his magic, every ounce he could muster, and bestowed it upon the sisters.
So there is an interesting question here, which we'll get to in a moment, about the origins of this fairy tale.
He smiled. "Take this gift and know now that you are able to do so much more." Now, armed with the elements, the very powers of nature, and the unimaginable magic of the wizard, the four maidens, winter, spring, summer, and fall, promised to carry onward with their journey, using their gifts to aid others, just as they had aided him. One by one, the sisters left, but before they did, they made one final promise. They promised to return each and every year to visit their dear friend.
Interesting. They promised to return. Is that sort of referring to the whole the fact that obviously they resurrect, that every time one of them dies the power goes on to someone else? Not resurrect, that's the wrong word entirely. You know what I mean? Okay, I definitely have thoughts coming out of that one. So obviously there's a whole question with the Maidens and the story of them, because of course in Volume 6, when we have the one episode where we get the whole lore dump about Salem and about Ospen, we do see that Salem and Ospen have daughters, 4 of them. So I know that I think a lot of people in the RWBY fandom tend to headcanon that those 4 daughters may very well be the 4 original Maidens. Though it's interesting because obviously that makes that potentially, well, because obviously the story itself, the fairy tale, plays out differently, because it implies that Ospen and the 4 Maidens previously didn't have any relationship before they met one another, whereas if, you know, the 4 original Maidens were actually his daughters, then, well, no, there was a pre-existing relationship between them. But I always thought maybe it could be that, like a lot of legends and fairy tales, that it may have started out in one form at one time, but then as the centuries have gone on, and with the retelling of the story, details in it have changed, and so that's why the Four Maidens fairy tale is in the form that it is, as you've seen it expressed in that video there. So it might just be a case of that. But yeah, I suppose that'd be an interesting question for all you watching this as well. Is it very much widely accepted in the RWBY fandom? Is that kind of the predominant theory or headcanon that those 4 daughters that Ozpin and Salem had during what I assume was Ozpin's second incarnation, were they the 4 original Maidens? Possibly. Alright, let's take a jump cut here and let's have our sort of outro wrap up in a second, so just a moment everybody. So that was those 4 World of Remnants, and yeah, we got a few more interesting snippets from those. So, a little bit about obviously where the Vital Festival came from. So, not really too much there though about the history of the WoR, but I'm wondering if there is a World of Remnant that's going to be on that at some point, possibly during Volume 4, because if there is, then that would be fantastic. So yeah, I mean, I don't think, with some of those, I don't think there was anything in particular that we learned that we didn't already necessarily know. But yeah, the Maidens one in particular I think is really, really interesting, just for that sort of, the fact that it sets out the story here in this volume, but then obviously in Volume 6 we add on the whole fact that Ozpin and Salem had 4 daughters at one point, and therefore that just raises questions about, the veracity of the fairy tale, how much of that legend is actually based on truth and how much is embellishment. Because like I say, it's the case with real life stories and legends and fairy tales as well. Sometimes you delve into old folklore and things like that, you might find little kernels of truth here and there related to things that actually happened based on the historical record. But then often, of course, as is the case, these stories, with each retelling over the centuries, extra details get added to them, they get embellished in certain ways, and thus they sort of spiral out and become these much, much bigger things than they actually were, with lots of additional details that aren't necessarily true, or retellings which actually completely reframe aspects of the narrative, that kind of thing. So I assume that that's basically the same with the fairy tale of the 4 Maidens on Remnant and all that. Yeah, so there's that. The other interesting aspect of this, like I say, is just what we had with the CCT World of Remnant, just about sort of, the difficulties of communication and transport on Remnant. So, yeah, it's sort of, I don't know, I mean, the questions I was raising there are very sort of speculative on one level, because of course we've not really had any specific detail beyond the development of dust technology about Remnant's technological trajectory over the history of the 4 kingdoms. So, but like I say, I assume that their history has very much been one where they're extremely dependent on dust as a form of energy. So that perhaps explains why, because it's abundant and it seems to be something that is easily accessible, or relatively easily accessible, I should say. Not easily accessible in the sense of you can just pick it up and walk along and all that, but it's in abundance, and therefore you can mine it en masse, and because it's quite powerful, there's different forms of it with different elemental capabilities, then naturally that's led to Remnant prioritising that throughout its history as a source of energy. Therefore, probably a whole industry sprang up around it quite early on, which has remained fairly consistent over the planet's history and all that. So, yeah, I would assume that, when you're thinking about how technology sometimes develops, dependence on certain resources that are needed in order to develop that technology, I think that can sometimes explain, the direction of technological development, and why maybe certain other technologies either are less developed by comparison, and thus, because like I say, surely on Remnant they must have other fuel and energy sources beyond dust, but you never hear of them, and so it's possible that, because dust was there, and it was sort of found very early on in the dawn of second humanity, then indeed, it's just maybe the case that over time there's been no incentive on the part of the Remnant Kingdoms to develop other forms of fuel and technology, energy technology, because why would they? What would they need them for? They've got dust. Because that is certainly one of the explanations, for example, in the real world as to why certain technological angles may not ultimately be pursued, because we have other energy sources or technologies that can actually that we already have, which are capable of doing certain jobs, and therefore why would you need to develop other stuff, that kind of thing. You know what I mean, right? I assume that's the case with Remnant. So the other interesting detail from that was just the whole bit about space. So obviously I mentioned there that given that dust doesn't seem to function outside of Remnant's atmosphere, to me that very much implies that whatever dust is, it is intimately bound with Remnant. And again, I know that my sort of headcanon that I've been mentioning a few times about how, is dust something that the God of Light purposefully left because it's bound to humanity and to Remnant in some way where it's designed to, do more than just provide elemental forms of power. It's also something to maybe kickstart humanity's re-emergence again. That I know that headcanon is very tenuous, as people in the comments have pointed out, because there's really not a lot actually to back it up or substantiate it. But again, I just feel like dust, if it is so intimately bound with Remnant that it basically doesn't function outside of Remnant's atmosphere and all that, then I suppose the question becomes, why is that? Why is that the case? What properties result in that occurring? And given that we know that, dust did not appear on Remnant until after the gods had left, it just raises that question of, is there some divine connection going on here? It's magic, there's something like that going on, who knows? Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I know that headcanon of mine, like I say, it's very tenuous. There's not a lot underpinning it, and therefore, you can't. It's not conclusive at all. In fact, very far from it. But I don't know. It's a headcanon basically. I think it'd be interesting to maybe get more answers on, what exactly dust is and all that, beyond just being this strange elemental substance that can be mined across Remnant, and that it only seemed to appear after the fall of first humanity and all that. But yeah, if you think about it, if Remnant could develop the ability to go into space and put satellites in orbit and that kind of thing, that probably would solve quite a few of their communication woes. Because obviously, like we've done here in on Earth in the real world, obviously satellite networks facilitate greater communication, global coverage of comms, that kind of thing. So, yeah, that it will probably help Remnant solve a few problems if they did develop that technology. But again, I suppose that also goes back to the question about the trajectory of Remnant's technological development, and do they have other fuel sources? Because like real-world rockets, for example, on Earth, we power them with oil-based fuels and that kind of thing. Admittedly, an individual rocket requires a lot of it, but it makes you wonder, couldn't Remnant use an alternative fuel supply other than dust? But if there aren't really any, then that suggests that the trajectory of Remnant's development maybe has been so sort of single track, to put it that way, i.e. just focused on dust, that they've kind of neglected everything else. So yeah, I think it's just a very interesting thing to think about and speculate about, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah, the other alternative, I suppose, again, sort of using a real-world example, if you're not using satellites, would probably be to try and lay undersea cables, critical infrastructure like that, like we have here in the real world. But again, I suppose that runs into the difficulties of the Grim, potentially. Same kind of challenges that obviously plague overland transit and communication, namely that, the presence of Grim and their attacks just makes things very unreliable. And of course we know that there are marine Grim as well, because obviously we see one in Volume 4, there's one in Volume 6 as well. So, it's interesting because the marine Grim are actually quite big, and so I would imagine that compared to the land, Remnant's oceans probably are even more dangerous. Because, you know, you remember the size of the Marine Grim that's encountered in Volume 4, the, you know, Blake and Son fight. Spoilers. And then obviously the giant freaking Godzilla-like Marine Grim that appears at the end of Volume 6. That, yeah, those are obviously far bigger than a lot of the Grim we've seen on land, to put it that way, because, you know, the biggest Grim that we see on kind of land are the elephant ones, I do believe, and maybe the Deathstalkers actually as well. They're pretty big, but yeah, not as big as the marine ones, I don't think. So yeah, Remnant's oceans are probably actually far more dangerous than the continental land masses, so that's probably why, you know, they've not gone down, well, I assume they maybe haven't gone down the route of mass laying of undersea critical infrastructure cables to try and link up the comms of the different kingdoms and all that. You know, maybe there have been people in Remnant's history who've tried, but it's just never worked because, I mean, the thing is, you know, the amount of undersea cable infrastructure that you need to really sort of create that kind of global comms network is pretty extensive. I mean, you look, for example, at real-world maps of critical undersea infrastructural cables here on Earth. The sheer number of them is pretty insane. You need a lot to try and have that kind of global coverage. So again, I assume it's Grim that get in the way, potentially, of that. And like I say, I imagine Marine Grim are extremely dangerous. Because I was just thinking actually about the Marine Grim that we do see over the course of the series, because certainly that Godzilla one at the end of... I keep calling it the Godzilla one. It's not Godzilla. It doesn't look anything like Godzilla, but it's the closest thing I can sort of use as an analogy. Because that Marine Grim, you know, that has like a freaking laser, doesn't it? That one. It fires a laser out of its mouth that can basically disable perimeter shields and that kind of thing. So that's pretty big and pretty freaking terrifying, that one. And similarly, doesn't the sort of the Marine Grim that we encounter in Volume 4, I think that has something similar, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't it? So yeah, something about Oceanic Grim. They've evolved mouth-borne lasers, apparently. So yeah. I didn't think I was going to go in that direction with the wrap-up conversation, but here we are. Yeah, well, you know, that was those World of Remnants then, ladies and gentlemen. All very interesting stuff. So, I think those are the main points, really, that I wanted to touch upon, but in essence, you know, there's plenty of interesting questions that do come out of that, and I'm sure, you know, you guys watching this probably have thoughts as well, so do, you know, leave those in the comments as always, and we'll have a chat. Other than that, I think we'll start to wrap up here then, ladies and gentlemen. So, thank you for joining me. And, you know, like I said, this video is going out on, 28th of December. So, you know, hope you have a happy new year and hope you had a good Christmas as well with friends and family. Hope it was a nice relaxing time and that you got a moment to, you know, just enjoy yourself away from the sort of pressures and anxieties of life, etc., etc. So as usual, usual outro spiel. Propagandist is of course my second channel. My main channel is John Strategist, where I do a fair bit of gaming content. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, go check it out. Link is down in the video description as ever. And other than that, ladies and gentlemen, I will wrap up here. So join me next time for Chapter 7, where we're going to get some really interesting things. So I think Chapter 7 is the flashback episode, isn't it? Where it's particularly related to Cinder and the 4 Maiden, so you've got that to look forward to. And then of course beyond that is when, you know, shit really starts to hit the fan in the Kingdom of Vale. So yeah, we're getting to the really interesting stuff now in Volume 3. Right, that's enough babbling from me. Join me for that then, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye everybody.